Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Carol An Duffy, which I'm reading out of the Norton Anthology of English Literature, which means they have a very small selection of Duffy's poetry, which is a very prolific, very successful Scottish English poet. She's Scottish, but she's lived much of her life and spent much of her career in England itself. One of the things that Duffy is really famous for is her dramatic monologues. So she will write from the perspective of a particular character. So I'm going to talk about two of those, Medusa and Mrs. Lazarus, both of which are clearly characters rooted in mythology, whether that's ancient Greek mythology or biblical mythology. One of the things that Duffy tends to do in her persona poems or her dramatic monologues like this is adopt the perspective of a well-known figure, but then try and turn it so that we're getting something unexpected. And I'm really, really interested in her Medusa poem because I've actually written about a number of different Medusa adaptations in poetry and film. And so I'm always fascinated with what people do with this particular character. In part because who Medusa is and what the characteristics of Medusa are really vary from teller to teller. So I'll read Duffy's whole poem, Medusa, for you, and then talk about some of the things I find really interesting. So this is Medusa. A suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy grew in my mind, which turned the hairs on my head to filthy snakes, as though my thoughts hissed and spat on my scalp. My bride's breath soured stank in the gray bags of my lungs. I'm foul-mouthed now, foul-tongued, yellow-fanged. There are bullet tears in my eyes. Are you terrified? Be terrified. It's you I love, perfect man, Greek god my own. But I know you'll go, betray me, stray away from home. So better by far for me if you were stone. I glanced at a buzzing bee, a dull gray pebble fell to the ground. I glanced at a singing bird, a handful of dusty gravel spattered down. I looked at a ginger cat, a house brick shattered a bowl of milk. I looked at a snuffling pig, a boulder rolled in a heap of shit. I stared in the mirror, love gone bad, showed me a gorgon. I stared at a dragon. Fire spewed from the mouth of a mountain. And here you come with a shield for a heart and a sword for a tongue, and your girls. Wasn't I beautiful? Wasn't I fragrant and young? Look at me now. So I think this is a really, really interesting treatment of Medusa. So I'll give you the baseline stuff. Like in Greco-Roman mythology, Medusa is one of the three Gorgons. In some versions of the mythology, Medusa and the Gorgons were born hideous, with snake. At least Medusa has snakes for hair and is able to petrify mortals with her gaze. There are some other variations in which she was initially a beautiful woman who was punished for one reason or another. The most famous version of which is Ovid's version from the Metamorphosis, in which Medusa is punished because Neptune, who's the Greek version of Poseidon, or the Roman version of Poseidon, rapes Medusa in Minerva's temple. Minerva is the Roman version of Athena in Greek mythology. And so because the temple was defiled by this act of love, sexual violence, realistically. And because Minerva cannot punish Neptune, she punishes Medusa and turns her into the snake-haired figure able to petrify mortals. Some feminists, second wave feminists, especially in the 20th century and 21st century, argued that Medusa could only petrify men, and that this was somehow a defense mechanism that Minerva gave her as a sort of upshot of having been victimized by Neptune. There's nothing that I can see in the Greco-Roman sources I'm familiar with, and I've looked at a decent number of them, that suggest that Medusa could only petrify men. But some feminists who very much adopted Medusa as an icon, and I think it's often really, really well done poetry, especially, but also essays and stories, in which Medusa becomes this feminist icon. I think it works really well, but it requires reimagining elements of the myth that aren't necessarily rooted in the Greco-Roman version. So that's similar kind of thing to what we get here. Duffy has a specific conception of Medusa's history that in some ways takes the titular character away from Greco-Roman mythology, but in some ways aligns with it. So, this opening stanza, a suspicion, a doubt, a jealousy grew in my mind, which turned the hairs on my head to filthy snakes, as though my thoughts hissed and spat on my scalp. That's a really interesting conception of this, because it's not obviously the Ovid version in which Minerva transforms Medusa into the snake-haired petrifier of mortals. But it's also not the typical second wave feminist version in which Medusa is a victim who then, out of rage and a desire for self-defense, spontaneously transforms herself into the snake-haired petrifier of men. In this instance, it's almost a more underlying understanding of not necessarily patriarchal violence, but patriarchal entitlement to women. This sense that the Greek god, the perfect man, but I know you'll go betray me, stray from home, that this sort of underlying knowledge that men betray, men cheat, men do whatever it is, and that knowledge itself becomes the basis of the transformation. And then we clearly have, in sort of the middle of the poem, where we have Medusa talking about petrifying bees and birds and cats and pigs, we clearly have a sort of rejection of the second wave feminist notion that some second wave feminists, not all, put forward, that Medusa only petrified men and that this was a self-defense mechanism. So that's, again, another really interesting thing. It goes back to what's more traditional in the Greco-Roman sources, in which Medusa petrifies anything. The other persona poem, or the other dramatic monologue included in here, is Mrs. Lazarus, the imagined wife of Lazarus, whom in the Bible Jesus raises from the dead. And it's a really interesting poem because this is an example of what the scholar Jeremy Rawson calls minor character elaboration, which is basically an approach in which a character who is either silenced, excluded, or peripheral in a well-known canonical work becomes the central figure of a new work. So, what was the experience of Lazarus's wife, who's not named in the Bible? I think in the Bible he does have a wife, but that's what Duffy sort of sets out to imagine in this poem. And so she talks through Mrs. Lazarus's grief, her suffering, her loss, her pain at the death of her husband, and then over time coming to terms with this, and even starting to return almost toward a normal life. And then suddenly Lazarus is back. Just the rupture, the disruption. How do you deal with that kind of thing? And it's such an interesting question that is completely bypassed by the book, by the Bible itself. Like, it isn't even an important consideration for the Bible. And so Duffy makes that experience central, which of course highlights through the very decenteredness or the very silencing of it, the Bible's treatment of women in general. But it also, again, asks these questions about what a miracle means for those on the periphery of it. There's one more of Duffy's poems in here that I want to talk about. It's called Warming Her Pearls, which I think is a brilliant poem. This is listed as for Judith Radstone, who the Norton Anthology says was a British political activist and bookseller from 1925 to 2000, who lived from 1925 to 2001. According to Radstone's obituary in the Guardian, the poem was inspired by a conversation with Radstone about the practice of ladies' maids increasing the luster of their mistresses' pearls by wearing them beneath their clothes. So, this is Warming Her Pearls. And I see two really interesting elements here, two things I find just fascinating with it. Next to my own skin, her pearls. My mistress bids me wear them, warm them until evening when I'll brush her hair. At 6, I place them round her cool white throat. All day I think of her, resting in the yellow room, contemplating silk or taffeta, which gown tonight. She fans herself whilst I work willingly, my slow heat entering each pearl, slack on my neck, her rope. She's beautiful. I dream about her in my attic bed, picture her dancing with tall men, puzzled by my faint, persistent scent beneath her French perfume, her milky stones. I dust her shoulders with a rabbit's foot, watch the soft blush seep through her skin like an indolent sigh. In her looking glass, my red lips part as though I want to speak. Full moon, her carriage brings her home. I see her every movement in my head, undressing, taking off her jewels, her slim hand reaching for the case, slipping naked into bed the way she always does, and I lie here awake, knowing the pearls are cooling even now, in the room where my mistress sleeps. All night, I feel their absence and I burn. So I think the most obvious thing that I find really interesting here is the same-sex desire that's foregrounded in this poem. Phrases like, all day I think of her. She's beautiful. I dream about her in my attic bed. The phrasing of which is really interesting because it can be read to mean, I dream in my attic bed about her, or it can be read to mean, I dream about her being in my attic bed with me. Watch the soft blush seep through her skin like an indolent sigh. My red lips part. I see her every movement in my head, undressing, slipping naked into bed the way she always does. I mean, this is a female speaker, a female poet persona here. And the sensuality, the sexuality, the emotional connection that this servant feels for her mistress, very clearly sort of foregrounds that same-sex desire and that sort of odd, that challenging tension, right? When, for instance, you were in domestic service and you lived continually with someone who you were in close sort of physical proximity to, but also someone who you helped dress, someone who you helped perfume, someone who maybe you even helped bathe, etc., etc. That physical intimacy between master and servant. And I mean, in a repressive era, like if we think of this as Victorian era or something like that, in a sexually repressive era in which sexuality was not really socially acceptable. Well, we know gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer, etc. people existed. And so that sort of difficulty of navigating, experiencing that desire in a way that is not only sexually unacceptable in this era, but also unacceptable in the social hierarchy. I mean, an aristocratic woman or an upper class woman, a wealthy woman, someone who could afford to have pearls and to have a lady's maid who could wear them for her to increase their luster, that person is not going to be having an affair with a servant of any gender, for the most part. Realistically, that did happen, but for the most part, that was socially unacceptable. It was another taboo element here. And so we're getting these sort of double taboos. But the other thing I think that's really interesting about this poem is a kind of transcorporeality, right? So transcorporeality deals with the change of the body, whether that be the change of the body through, say, ingestion, whether that be the change of the body through environmental factors, whatever it is, but something about the body shifts because of an additional element. The pearls are the sort of transcorporeal link here, right? So in the second stanza, we get these lines: she fans herself whilst I work willingly, my slow heat entering each pearl. The life force, the bodily energy of this poet persona, of this lady's maid, is physically entering the pearls, changing their complexion, changing their complexity, their physical being. And then in the third stanza, this line: puzzled by my faint, persistent scent beneath her French perfume, she has become almost a part of the mistress, right? The scent of this lady's maid is part of the physical experience, the sensual experience of the mistress now. And then this last bit, all night I feel their absence and I burn. That the speaker here becomes almost physically connected back to the pearls as they lose the heat, the body heat from herself and the mistress. It physically alters the speaker's body, her own experience of her body. Really interesting.